I welcome everyone who ever listens to this video of ours. Now, today's topic is something which creates a lot of controversy, we might say, among people who want to understand and know what is reality, what happens, what doesn't happen, what are these processes that run through the mind when death consciousness arises and the such. And a great friend of ours, Mo, wanted to, have a discussion about this topic so that it can be understood by clear logic, deduction, and all the tools that we have in order to analyze reality. So please, Mo, if you would ask the question now.
Om Krishna, Om to those that are listening. So oftentimes it is said by many, and it is understood by many, that when people quote unquote die, leave the physical form, that they're going to heaven. And that is a big confusion with many. That is not our understanding. Our understanding of it is where you are is where you go. So if someone is wicked, they don't all of a sudden get an entrance into what they call heaven. And does heaven even exist? Because all this exists in our mind. So let's clear this up for everybody, Krishna, so that people know what to expect and they can work on it now so that where they are is where they go, and they have some real clear knowledge and realization of this process, rather than this false information that has been told to us since we were young. And it's showing in movies and all sorts of things. Oh, they're gonna go to heaven and all their loved ones are gonna greet them. Everyone listening to this, wouldn't you rather know the truth of what occurs, and you can prepare yourself now for it and be well prepared for your own death, leaving the form, and really jump into where you could actually go and where you, rather than what we're told. Okay, we'll stop. We'll stop going on and pass the mic over to you, Krishna. Thank you so much.
Okay, so the very first thing that you have to mention is this. Whatever feathers a being has, that being cannot think outside the feathers. Could they think? If they could think outside their feathers, then those feathers would be already weakened. Now, we have already spoken about the feathers in detail, and we have already spoken about the validity of the list of feathers 10,000 years ago, and in 10,000 years, that includes also today. And we saw that it is very logical, but what the point is that, let's say that we know, because of our deductive logic, that the first three feathers are concerning what is called the right view about things. And I particularly want to speak about the very first feather, which is identity view, thinking that there is any undestructible soul within man which will survive this and that, which you call yourself when not in the body, or whatever people might call the soul. Now, the very first thing that the path asks us is to see, to judge by logic and understanding what are the five aggregates and what kind of inner working they have. So, whenever we speak about identity, it means that there are the five feathers of form, feeling, memory, opinions, views, and experience. And in this sense, whenever there's an identity, what I call myself and I hold it high, that is in fact an identity, an identification with one of the aggregates. And if you look upon what people say they are, or where they go, or where they come from, it's always, most of the time, of course, not all the time, something concerning the aggregates. My past defines me, so for example, or my experiences about life, and these define my existence. All these things are identifications with the aggregates, and this is identity. So, and we know that identity is based in the very first point to greed, and of course delusion, because wherever there's greed, there's delusion, because you give rise to that greed not knowing that it is suffering. So just looking upon identity, thinking that there is a soul that will get anywhere. So a being cannot think outside of its own feathers, because if they could, then the feathers would be much more weak and even abandoned, which doesn't happen most of the time, of course. So whenever this thing that you want to meet your loved ones, what are your loved ones? If you really think about it, those are mental formations, because those are your opinion about other beings. And right away we have spoken about this, that already Sotapanna sees that whatever comes to formation, to be, will cease to be. So in that same manner, that being whom you call loved one, whether family or friend, they have never been the same being throughout existence. You, all the time you met them, it was always a new being. It is just that you were deceived by appearances, and just because the body looked the same, and all things that are part of the body, like the sound they make, the mental formations they have, the feelings they have, you assume that you always meet the same being, but that's illusion, because nothing ever is the same. You, when you started to listen to this recording, are not the same being as right now, because there is no so-called being. Those are just the 5 aggregates in their function. So this is just, again, if you look upon this, if we speak about heaven, what would be the definition that people say? So there are 2 ways that people describe it. Number 1, state with God, and number 2, final peace, where there is no more suffering. All right, so let's analyze both of them, and let's see how it becomes fallible to think in such terms. So to say that you will meet your creator. So number 1, I want you to understand that this life, if you truly say that it was done by a creator, then you say that your karma is your own creator, because this life was created from previous craving. You craved this and that, and here you are again experiencing, but you don't get satisfied. So this was the reason for which many beings could see beyond, that they saw that here there's nothing in this world that could be desirable, that there's nothing beautiful in this world at all, because it's delusion upon delusion upon delusion. Everything here is a mess of suffering, so to say. So seeing thus, they understood that your peace, final rest or blessed rest, you have to find somewhere else, because okay, let's say that yes, there are heavens, and according to experience, even right now you can enter different heavens, because if you define heaven as a place of happiness, so to say, then I say that already jhanas, for example, that we spoke about, fine material and immaterial, are places where there is no immediate suffering. So I will give an example: infinite space. Just imagine a being who exists in the heaven of infinite space. Do they suffer? No, not in the sense of, having mental unpleasantness, because it's impossible to have mental unpleasantness in that. So they are quite free, not in the freedom of mukti, but in the freedom of not being caught up in matter. for example. So right away they are free, and there is no suffering for them, but they are not released from suffering because they are still in a type of word, a formation, because jhanas are in a way formations. Why so? Because they exist within the mind if the mind tends towards them. So there's an active process. So let's say if I sit down here and I enter infinite space, for example, then right away I entered a heavenly realm of existence because I am no longer in suffering. Or you don't even have to go to immaterial jhanas. Find material jhanas where you only have zest, happiness, and one-pointedness. That could also be called a heavenward, or no more thoughts either. So that is also happiness because there's no quote-unquote immediate suffering. There's suffering in the background because you're still not released and you're conditioned by that heaven. So there are, in total, if we count how many heavens there are, even the human realm is called a heaven. So in fact, what we call a heaven is a place from where you can liberate. This could be a definition of heaven. Whatever plane of existence which gives you the capability of liberation can be called a heaven. So the human realm is the so-called lowest heaven. There are so-called sensual heavens. So for example, this human world is a sensual heaven. And why is it heaven? Because here these beings possess the nature. Of course, even an animal possesses, so to say, Buddha nature, but they are incapable of attaining to Buddhahood or Arahanthood. Here on the human world, that is the lowest one, but here already it's possible to get liberated, to just look upon great beings as Shankaracharya, and we could name them, that indeed liberated from here. And there are other 6 sensual planes that are spoken about. So in total, there are 7 sensual heavens. And this can be known by experience, by what? By concentration. It's like being, you want to find the radio channel and you switch, in a way, your concentration. I wouldn't say your vibration because it is a lot used nowadays in New Age sermons, like vibration, energy, and it's not the point. The point is that you have a so deep concentration that you actually can enter these realms for shorter or longer periods of times. There were great beings who could even have, those beings realize that they are not yet liberated from those heavens. And then, so we are at 7. And then there are 4 jhana heavens. We spoke about 5 jhanas, but because the first and the second create one single jhana word, there are 4 jhana words, and each of them have 3 different levels according to the way a being has practiced and entered those jhanas. So let's say the first jhana also has, the first and the second have 3 stages, whether somebody was in a beginner stage, an intermediary, or a completely master stage of that. And in this sense, all the 4 jhana words have 3 different ones. So it's 4 times 3 is 12, plus you add the 7 sensuals, it's 19 already. And then there are the 4 immaterial heavens, so to say, the infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. Adding these 19 plus 4 together, you end up at 23. And then there are the so-called pure abodes where non-returners go, and there are 5 of them. So 23 plus 5, it's 28. And let's say around 30 types of heaven there are. So if you say that you want to go to heaven, what a being of understanding will ask you is, which one would you prefer out of these? Because with concentration, you can end up in any of these if you have strong one-pointedness and strong power to enter these jhanas and stay in them and cultivate them, your next life will be in one of the upper realms of existence. So out of these around 30 heavens, if you ask a being of knowledge, they will ask you back, which one would you prefer to go to? Because these heavens have never been seen as finer release, because you also say that you want to live with gods, and I must tell you that only gods live with gods. No human being ever lived with gods. So because in every heaven there are heavenly beings, so to say, so in Janaverse there are Mahabrahmas and the such. If you want to get there and enjoy the company of gods, even if you're a Western society, you make part of a Western society and you say that I will be with Yahweh, then I say that only Yahwehs are with Yahwehs, in the sense that you have to possess a certain jhana or a certain quality in order to get to that word, and in that word you are not a human being anymore, because human beings are in the lowest realm of the heavens, the seventh heaven, we might say, or first heaven, depending from which order you look at it. So in order to be with gods, you yourself have to attain to, so to say, this such of a godhood in order to be with them. But I want you to understand that this has never been seen as a release, because you still crave, you still cling to happiness and peace and all these things. These are jhanas, and what we call finer release. Now there are two ways to describe it. There is an Advaita way to describe it, and there is another way to describe it. So the Advaita says this small being possesses, is in itself the self, but because of delusion it doesn't understand that it is the pure Satchitananda, and liberation is attained when this being here realizes that they are not different, that only Satchitananda is, this is the right way to put it. Satchitananda or Brahman means the ultimate reality, beyond existence and non-existence, all these things we can say, but the point is not this. And the other way to say it is that when all the craving and clinging is over, when all the 10 fetters are abandoned, then the being has no more craving and clinging to come and go, and therefore at the end of their life, they attain the ultimate. And of course, these are not two different things. It is just that in one way I use the word Brahman, and Brahman exclusively means the ultimate reality, or saying, that when you abandon all greed, hatred, delusion, which is not different from Brahman, then that is the release. And you see, if you want to go here and there, you in fact want to reincarnate. Even if you're a Western and you say, oh, there is no reincarnation, then I will confront you and say, where you here are right now in a form, and you desire to be in a higher existence in another form, which obviously you think that is similar to this one, but it's not the same because that one was buried or cremated. So you think that now you're in one form, and then you will be in another form. So it doesn't make too big of a difference than just saying that you want to reincarnate in a heaven. And the moment there's reincarnation, it's called rebirth linking. And rebirth linking means that there was clinging, craving, and the such, and feathers haven't been abandoned that much. So there is going. The mind keeps going. Here, there, here, there. It depends on its own cause and effect. And I want you to understand that getting to all these heavens is just consequence. It's just a consequence which will at some point wear out its own origination, and then you end up in another realm. So a being in infinite consciousness might be very free compared to a human being, but in the same time you might get caught up in the beauty of infinite consciousness as the immaterial jhana, and not go beyond. Because we know that the only way liberation truly can be attained is if right now, here and now, you can touch that infinite reality here and now. If you can touch it here and now, then certainly you will go well and attain the ultimate goal. So that is to say, to take as an object of your meditation the ultimate reality, which has been described as signless, desireless, and void. And then you take one of these and you absorb yourself in signlessness, and then there you have the ultimate reality here and now. Those are the so-called fruition consciousnesses, the so-called, I might say as well, cosmic consciousness or supramounting consciousness. These are the ones that make you liberated, because at last you no longer cling to the objects of this world. Because if you want to see your beloveds, of course you will see it, and it's called family karma, because you will see them here and now, but you will not be as happy with it as you thought that you will, because you will see the beings come back, but they are not the same beings, nor are you, and you just continue loving each other so much that you are simply incapable of letting go of that clinging. And so whenever a being wants to liberate itself, it takes desirelessness, voidness, or signlessness as the object of meditation, so to say. And when the mind is fully absorbed in it, then everything ceases to be. There's no word, no here and there, no light, darkness, good, bad, because all this just ceases to be. Signless and the void can be understood best by the mind. It simply means, what is void? Well, it's not nothing, but it's not nothing either. It's simply beyond. And this is the so-called void emancipation, or signless emancipation, or desireless emancipation, of course. And this is why it's important for you to understand that as long as you crave and want to go here and there, it is in the terms of Fetters, it's called fine material rebirth desire, and most of the times beings desire the fine material, and then immaterial rebirth desire. It depends what kind of being it is. But normally in, so to say, society, beings crave fine material things. And now to move to another part of Mo's question, to say that here you will live and you end up in a fine material world. So the point is, if you want this lasting happiness of the jhanas, let them be just the fine material ones. There are so-called jhana factors. Let's say that you want to be truly blissful, so you go for the third jhana, which has zest, happiness, and one pointedness. That is the most blissful in terms of pleasure feelings. So you have to have zest that you can create within your own body, happiness that you can create within yourself, not by outside, that somebody gives you a gift and then you're happy. And out of this all, one pointedness means that you can stick with an object for at least like 30 minutes or so. So you take a meditation object, let's say the breath, and you're capable to concentrate on that breath for, let's say, 50 minutes without ever really switching for another object. Oh, my phone. Oh, this or that. In one-pointedness, there is no oh, this or that, because then there is no one-pointedness. So if you crave a jhana, at least fulfill your own desires and enter it here and now, and see that this is not too big of a thing. And you enter the jhana and you see, well, there's happiness, there's one-pointedness, there is zest, but there is nothing there. It doesn't satisfy ultimately, because you will anyway have to come and eat something and drink something and meet people. So you're still conditioned. But if you want to go to heaven, then at least these things you should be able to create out of your own mind. Simply creating zest in the body. What does it mean? That right away you could enter, I wouldn't say trance, a state where you could cry out of joy and you have such happiness and one-pointedness. now if you can enter this, then right away you're in a heaven. That's very much it. So I want you to understand that heavens don't really give you anything that you could be satisfied with. If they did, then you would be satisfied with human life as well, as it is another heaven. But are you? Not really. This is why you want to go somewhere else. But you don't know how that somewhere else is. If you think that somewhere else is, then you have to enter it here and now in front of us so that we may judge that experience. If you say that you cannot experience it here and now, then what is the proof that it truly exists? So originally, at the very beginning of great masters, whenever they spoke about heaven, it did mean liberation. But right now it means jhanas, and you see how degraded the teaching is. To mistake jhanas for liberation is a very big logical flaw, because it is not liberation. Because when you want to get liberated, you take signlessness, voidness, a desirelessness, and the jhana, you create factors and you take delight in those factors, jhanic factors, so to say. So just because you died, since you didn't have the comprehension to understand what a jhana is, how come you say that you will end up in a jhana world? People work hard to enter jhana worlds by themselves, even here and now. And you say that just because you died, you have attained anything. But in fact, people of knowledge, again, I must say, when you die, they don't see that you died and you are already liberated. They see that the process continues. It is just that you shed the body. The body is one aggregate out of the 5. All the rest are there in a residual form, and they will recreate because you had clinging to this. And it might be best said in the following way, as Mo said, whatever you are, that is where you go, or this is similar how Mo said it. But the point is, if you have clinging, then you will end up in words of clinging. If you have ill will, you will end up in words of ill will. If you have delusion, you will end up in words of delusion. So all these things here are just consequences. And we spoke about heavens, but I also want to speak about hells, because that is another contradictory topic in society. So why did I say hells? Now, you might as well assume that if the definition of heaven was any place from where you can liberate, because you have the comprehension, you might have the comprehension, then hells are those places where in those moments of existence you don't have it. Now, well, hells in their sense are the lowest realm of existence, but in a figurative way, you might call also the animal world a type of hell, because for them there is a lot of suffering and they don't even have the possibility to liberate. Not there. In another existence, as a being, at least on the human plane, yes, they already have it, but as animal beings, you are at the mercy of your owners and your circumstances. So knowing this, hells, even those hells that people call hells, that people imagine fires and such, but it is obvious that it doesn't come from understanding, because had you entered any hell realm, you would know what it is. And there are so-called cold, frozen hells as well, which is different in quality, but it is the same in that it is still suffering. It is just that there are fiery hells, frozen hells, and this can be understood only by concentration. And here you see how fallible the philosophy of beings is, that there are only cravings and clingings, and I want the good, I don't want the bad, but you still want to cling and crave and go here and go there. And hells are those places where the unwholesome beings with massive unwholesomeness enter. And for example, sensual heavens, where most of the people want to go to see their beloveds, are so-called sensual heavens, where there are 7 of these. And you end up in sensual heavens by what? good deeds, only good deeds, and you might end up in higher realms, or of course human. But many times those who have, so to say, good hearts, they might end up in higher heavens, not jhanas, sensual heavens. But the point is that those are very close to human existence, so you may fall back very easily, because good merits, there is the seeds of your rebirth, and when the seed is burnt, then you fall back, and you fall and climb and fall and climb, and you call this liberation, and then you see the flaw in the logic. So heavens and hells, that is in fact what is to be known about them, and that being of knowledge doesn't take delight in either of these, because they understand that in a way all existence is a big hell, in the sense that there's suffering again and again and again and again. So anyone who has taken seriously liberation and doesn't want to just hallucinate that they come here and there, will go and concentrate and meditate upon the nature of reality, and not just assuming that the nature of reality will reveal itself just because you died. Because you didn't die, you just shed the form, but the rest, feelings are there, perception is still there, mental formations very much there. So you cannot say that you transcended a single thing. But because you identified with only the body mainly, then shedding the body seems as the real end, but not for one who has seen. For example, in the fifth jhana, it is also called a direct knowledge consciousness, because there, in fact, you can, any type of miracle that has ever been performed by any great being, those were not performed by being gods or the such, those were performed by jhanas, because they got absorbed in the elements that they worked with. So, going on water, even the Buddha spoke about this before the Christ did that, and it is a deep absorption with the water element. In fact, the earth element, and then reflected on the water. So there you can recollect your past lives, and that is where beings recollect it. And the reason why, for which beings don't remember their past lives, is very simple, because they did not care enough to meditate and enter the fifth jhana and there to recollect and see for them that this life wasn't created by a god but by their own ignorance. And then in the fifth jhana, it's very clear that every life was created from a previous craving, and then you see that it just happened and happened and happened and happened again. So there's nothing particular about these words. You may use them for momentary, let's say you have a very big headache and you enter a jhana and the headache is gone, and this very much is possible. Or you end up or you experience immaterial heavens like infinite space and the such. But these are, so to say, not for entertainment, because it's not entertainment in that sense, but those don't really give anything to liberation, because just because a being can enter infinite space, it doesn't mean that they have ever touched signlessness or desirelessness or voidness. So that is the reason for which we say that yes, they can be very useful, because they can show you, so for example, infinite space can show you that materiality doesn't have an eternal existence, because there are states which do not include materiality and they still exist. Infinite consciousness even more, nothingness even more, neither perception nor non-perception even more, but those are still part of samsara, of coming and going. And as long as there is a desire to come and go, you cannot speak about release, because there is greed, which is delusion, and delusion doesn't just go away by itself because you cling to it. So if Ma would like to add anything to it, or something wasn't too clear, then please.
It was very clear. Thank you, Krishna. One thing I could see those listening to this not really understand desireless. I could see them get confused about that, because what is taught or understood on planet Earth is get yourself engaged in life. You know, take a vacation, you know, do this, do that. And those are just cultivating more desires. So how could you explain to those listening how to be desireless on planet Earth?
All right, so there are two ways to do this. So desirelessness, it is meditative absorption. It's being absorbed in Nirvana is desirelessness. So whenever a being enters a supramundane consciousness, that which corresponds to their level of enlightenment, stream enterer, once returner, non-returner, arahant, then there is the end of all words, because there is no more, so to say, desire for experience, and then consciousness settles down in desirelessness. And yes, there is a consciousness, but it is not that you want to perceive or feel or anything, because there are no more desires to experience. So that is one way to do, but in fact, what happens is that whenever a desireless state is entered the very first time, certain desires cease. So for example, let's say there is a worldling, and they have desires for having a self, like greed towards the formations, right? And then like identification with them, better said. And then if they enter, by insight knowledges, the path consciousness and the fruition, then when they might not even realize, because the fruition happens so they cease to be, they enter cessation for 2 moments. This is what happens at the very beginning. And you might not even notice that there was cessation for 2 moments, because 2 moments is really nothing, so to say. So, but they no longer have the desire for rituals, for example. So if you truly want to live an absolutely desireless life, that means that you have to attain arahanthood, because an arahant doesn't have desire to come and go, to say somebody's above, below, to desire a single thing from existence. That is the best way to describe this. So desirelessness can be entered by any noble disciple. Stream enterer, once returner, non-returner, also of course bodhisattvas. So they enter the signless or void, but it also includes the desireless, because these two are non-different. Those are just 3 types of emancipations, but because the emancipation is one, those are just 3 ways of seeing the emancipation, experiencing the emancipation. So a stream enterer can enter this fruition of theirs, better said, and then there is the desirelessness, because the world ceases to be, because there are no more objects. There is no object taken, there is just desirelessness. And this is one way to experience desirelessness, by entering that, and then the world completely ceases to be. Or even by, through living in the world, a stream enterer doesn't have desire for rituals or doubts. Non-returner doesn't have desires for sensuality or ill will. And only an arahant doesn't have desires for anything at all. So, to just sit and be desireless, you can be desireless towards certain things while not being an arahant. Only an arahant can be desireless towards all things. But if a noble disciple enters the fruit that they gained by insight, it is the desirelessness there and then. So they indeed touch nirvana there and then. It is just that, they still have, when they emerge from it, they still have desires for other things. Only an arahant. For an arahant, well, entering the fruition and not entering the fruition, of course, there's a difference, but fundamentally they are desireless, even in fruition, obviously, but also when they're out of fruition, consciousness, then they're also desireless. So to enter desirelessness, truly to understand what desirelessness means, normally this is why I speak about the signless and the void, because it's much, well, I wouldn't say logical, but much more comprehensible, like void. It means that everything ceases to be, or the signless even better because it describes how no sign of formations is there. Therefore is the signless emancipation. And in the signless, since there are no objects, also feelings cease to be, perception ceases to be, and there is only this, so to say, cosmic consciousness which doesn't perceive or experience. It is just existence. It exists, and this is why we always call the ultimate Satchitananda. Not Sat means that there is this existence beyond existence and not existence, so to say. It's beyond conditions, so to say. Then we say it's Ananda, which means blissful. Blissful not in the sense of being, happy or feeling blissful, but as the end of all suffering is to be understood as blissful. And then Chit, which means consciousness, is this unestablished, unconditioned consciousness. So this is the desireless. When there are no more objects, because the world ceases to be, then there are no more desires either, because you cannot desire thing. When you emerge now, then you can have desires for that particular freedom or other things that you have not put an end to. So that is our answer, if it was satisfactory enough.
Yes. Can you speak a little bit more on signlessness?
Yes. So those who take as impermanence so when you do insight knowledges, when you contemplate insight knowledges, you take, for example, impermanence as the way you look at things. So you see that, well, this jhana is impermanent because this and that factor just are there momentarily. Everything is impermanent because those are just momentary experiences. It's not like a straight line of experience. Those are like lines cut in many pieces and you jump from moment to moment, so there's continuous change. Therefore, nothing is permanent. And by cultivating this impermanence, you end up at a climax, so to say, where if you contemplated, I will give an example to the other two. If you contemplated suffering, then obviously the emancipation that you get is the desireless, because desires create suffering. So the root cause of desires is of suffering is desires. So obviously, if you cultivated the understanding about suffering, then your emancipation will be the desireless, because you understand the root cause. If you contemplate the no self, you end up with the void. What is the difference between the no self and the void? Well, in no self, you contemplate formations as no self. In the void, there are no more formations. And then, if you contemplate impermanence, like things change and they're impermanent and keeps going, we will have a video on insight knowledges, so be sure to check that out later. Then, impermanent will lead, because impermanence means that you have a sign of existence, because wherever there is a sign, like a way of existence, like how should we say, a stream of existence, it is its own sign that there is materiality, for example, or there is fine material world. And these are the signs of impermanence, because all those heavens, hells, everything, they have the sign of existence because they are conditioned. And therefore, if you contemplate how impermanent these existences are, then you end up with the signless, because you contemplated the continuously rising and falling signs of existence. And because you contemplated this and you cultivated and culminated it, then you end up with the signless, because there are no more sign of formations, because Brahman has always been described as, abiding beyond existence and non-existence, which means that it's unmade, and this is how signlessness has to be understood, that there is no sign of formations. Here you look around and you have all the signs of materiality around you. A giant of world being has the signs of fine material, like mental objects. An immaterial being has the signs of concepts, like infinite space, infinite consciousness, blah, blah, blah. In hell realms, obviously, the sign is suffering itself. So here you have the signs of existence, and these are they continuously rise and fall. And you see this sign of rising and falling. And this is how you contemplate impermanence. And then when you put it into its highest point, then you enter the signless, because the mind that doesn't take delight anymore. In fact, it's equanimous towards formations. It doesn't take delight. This is what it means. And then by having conformity towards everything that has been seen before, one enters the signless. So there's no more sign of, so to say, existence, because many times Brahman is described as the cessation of existence. It's not annihilation, and I want to make this point here. It's not annihilation because there is only this supraman, this, consciousness beyond formations that is there. So it just touches the unmade, the deathless element, so to say. So nothing really becomes annihilated. You in fact just see things for what they are. Are they impermanent? Yes. Are they without a self? Yes. Do they create suffering? Yes. So when you end up seeing this, it is just that you see reality, and you see that reality is Sunyata, that all things are really empty in nature. They hold nothing in themselves. And then you enter this bliss in the self, in the sense, not as a feeling of bliss, rather than, in the sense of freedom, that it is blissful, that there are no more signs of existence of that big mess of pervert suffering. And then that is why it's blissful, because there is no more sign. There's only the void. I mean, there's nothing there, obviously. So that is why it's called the signless.
Very well. So even though a cat may appear in front of you, a dog, another body, you're equanimous with them. You realize everything here is empty, and you're equanimous with everything that's around you. Doesn't get you no desire, no anything. You're just in that space of equanimous, so nothing comes up. Could that
Yes.
be a way to describe it to those listening as well?
Yes, so if somebody returns, let's say somebody returns from their signless, so to say, experience, and let's say that they are non-returners, which means that they don't have identity view, doubt, attachment to rituals, sensual desires, and ill will. So for them, you might show them the most beautiful man or woman or food in the world. Simply sensual desire will not arise. It's because their fruition, their attainment of their realization of Brahman in that sense. And because they realize Brahman in one way, not fully, but they have touched that. They have touched it, better said. They no longer take delight in it because it burnt out from them. Because even though this cessation of existence happens for 2 moments, it is strong enough to simply wipe away all those defilements that are corresponding to that level of enlightenment. And thus is it that it doesn't arise in them. So when they come out, they still have eye consciousness. Maybe they see, they hear, they smell, they taste, they touch, they speak, everything. Only that, for example, a non-returner simply will have no sensual desire, whatever form you might give rise to. They will simply not find delight in sensuality. And sensuality doesn't just mean sex. It means, all those 5 senses that are used. They will not take delight in. Simply they are incapable of having aversion towards things and taking delight in sensuality. This is what it means. So this is how you have to understand it. That simply it is like it's off. There's not a button. They cannot push the button. Even if they try to force themselves, which they don't obviously, they simply are incapable of feeling sensual desire or aversion. This is how you have to understand. This is the aftermath of the fruit. But it simply doesn't make a difference for them. This is how you have to understand how it means. So, for example, if you happen to meet a non-returner or something like that, well, obviously you cannot tell unless if you're a non-returner or an arahant or a Buddha, who knows. But you simply, they will not take delight in sensuality, not because in that moment they are in the fruition, but that is the aftermath of the fruition, that it's simply, it's over. They put an end to such mental fermentations as sensual desires and ill will. This is how you have to understand their days of human existence, for example.
Could you say it's resultant?
Yes, because the fruition is the resultant of the path. So it is, in a way, it's called resultant because if you look upon consciousness and how it works, is the result of the cultivation and culmination of the insight knowledges. So in fact, it is the result of wiping away the feathers, that they no longer have those feathers, so to say, because the feathers no longer exist. They're incapable of showing signs of those feathers. It's over. It's gone, because they touched the signless, and because it was according to their level of enlightenment. It simply is over. They cannot do it ever again. They will not find delight in that, and it's over. Yes, it's in types of consciousness, the fruition is said to be a resultant because it's a result of wiping away, of destroying the feathers. But fundamental what happens is an absorption in Nirvana. And, the whole point of fruition is to experience the Nirvana here and now, the Brahman here and now. And this is why, in fact, Satchitananda also includes consciousness, because many times the followers of the Buddha end up, saying that because they sometimes present a nihilistic, standpoint by saying that, all the 5 aggregates will, break up and then they never reform. And then I say it's consciousness, which is part of the aggregates. Well, we shall see that not all the time, because the aggregates, are subject to change. Whereas if I speak about signless consciousness, it is not. So, the supramundane type of consciousness can be called, impermanent, in the sense that as long as a being is in the world, they come out from the absorption, right? So, for example, it is said that one can stay in this supramundane fruition for 7 days, okay? And then after that, they will come out, and then they will eat and drink, and so they will, continue their life. And therefore, so to say, their fruition is impermanent. This is why consciousness in general is called impermanent. Not that nirvana is impermanent, because in order to observe, in order to be absorbed in the signlessness, you have to have a signless consciousness. I think that we agree on that. That in order to experience a certain reality, you have to have a consciousness that absorbs it in that reality. We agree on that, or we don't?
We agree.
So it is said that an arahant, fruition is impermanent because they still have the body here. Feelings still arise because whenever there is a sight, a type of feeling arises. So it is logically not the end game. But when they leave, they have the so-called unestablished consciousness, which is vijnanam anidassanam. This is so-called unestablished consciousness, which simply means that it is beyond. And this vijnana anidassanam is truly not part of the aggregate consciousness. Okay, we call it a consciousness, but truly it is just, absorption beyond feelings and perception, so to say, because, one point, the point is that if nirvana can be experienced here and now, then certainly anyone who passes away as an arahant, enters the nirvana element. So it's quite obvious. And if you say that there's no more consciousness, then yes, there's no more sense consciousness, obviously, because the signlessness and desirelessness and the void that we spoke about. But to say that, it is all over, yes, the being is all over, that's very right. But it is only, so to say, nirvana that remains, or the Brahman, as we say. Only Brahman remains there. So, this is why we always say Satchitananda, and this is why we always say this chit. This chit is not that, there is an experience or that it has a feeling to it. It is rather than this consciousness is unestablished. It doesn't move in the six senses, five senses plus the mind element. Everything became transcended, and this is the so-called transcendental consciousness, which is absorbed in nirvana.
So where we are is where we are. And that's where this question began. So
and this is where it ends.
Yeah, it must be experience here and now where you are for it to be experienced later on. So we wanted to clear that up for everybody rather than the false pretenses of what has been said for eons to the human population. And then also we'll have another Krishna Speaks on the insight knowledges, which will go along with this as he referenced them. Is there anything else you'd like to share or say, Krishna, before we wrap her up?
Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, everyone. Om.